New Year's Day, I got picked up by a friend of mine who has a place in Florida. I went and stayed with her. And her house, they live here. Martin's in our deer management program, in our golf. And I thought I'd stay with her for a week. And then I rented a car and then drove to Panama City Beach. He came home, he had to come home on New Year's Day. Oh, Christine has.
He was over Christmas a couple years ago. We got a phone call. And he's been the next 5 hours on the phone.
See, we should have told her because when you went back, you got to look. You got to keep it.
I was thinking about you. What guarantees?
Thank you.
Mine's a different church.
I'm good.
Good. Yeah.
Doing all right. Busy as ever.
Because if anybody hears they hold on to data, it won't pay.
All right.
There's an ethics involved.
Yes, I saw that just now. Yeah.
Clark Construction, they've been doing a lot of renovations. Type construction projects.
11 million for 55,000 square feet.
Yes.
That's bananas.
It is, and then I thought, what was it, 2018? No, I went back.
Oh
and
yeah,
looked.
yeah. Well,
So
there you go.
it wasn't 2 years ago.
Inflation's like 100% since then. If only we'd gotten on this 5-6 years ago.
Am I correct in that we have 10? Then that recommendation goes.
Oh, that's good.
Because it has to be diversified. It has to be passed by the board. Question on the ballot by the second meeting. We gotta give the board two.
It was crazy. I know. He said it was. So he doesn't know if they were like.
From the
He said this is really, really weird.
we just assumed somehow one was down and one combined. Tim said that as well.
Yes, they're sharpening their pencils in the 50%.
We had.
We haven't seen
Okay.
that.
Am I not looking at that?
Nope, we see that next meeting. All right, we gotta get started. Good evening, everyone. We will call this meeting to order. This is the February 25th, 2025 meeting of the Senior and Community Task Force for the Charter Township of Meridian. First on our agenda is roll call. Member Nardo Ferris.
Present.
Member Vagnosi. Member Malley. Member Hood. Member Nagasetti. Member Robertson. Here. Member Maisner.
Here.
Member Steed.
Here.
And Chair Hendrickson is here. So we have squeaked by with barely a quorum this evening. I did hear from Mr. Vagnosi and Mr. Hood that they were both feeling under the weather. So our best wishes out to them for a speedy recovery, and we'll see you outside of flu season, hopefully. Next on our agenda is public remarks. If you would like to speak at public remarks, there are some half-white sheets over on the table there. Feel free to fill one of those out and hand it to staff, and we'll be happy to get you on the roster to speak. Rules are the same as they have been throughout for this meeting. Public remarks are limited to 3 minutes, and we ask that you please give us your name and address at the beginning for the sake of our minutes taking. So first up this evening is Barbara O'Kelly, and then Neil Bowlby. You are on deck.
Thank you, Chairman Hendrickson. I'm Barbara O'Kelly from Woodhill Drive. My main objective tonight was to just thank the task force, because between the meetings and the correspondence I've had in between meetings and that other of our members have had, we really appreciate how seriously you're taking our input. And so thank you very much. I hope Steve would be here to ask some questions because they're more discussion, but there are a couple of questions that I hope, and these are from me, not from the advisory board. But one thing was regarding the 1.35 FTE for building and grounds. We're going, I think, to a lovely, very wooded site. So I would hope that we would be preserving as many of the trees as possible, have a minimum amount of lawn. Excuse me, the current small garden area is right adjacent to the building in the current senior center are maintained by volunteers, and I think that could be done. So I would hope that our grounds maintenance would be mainly seasonal for plowing the lots and sidewalks. The other thing I'm wondering is, I know that Parks and Rec now runs a couple of senior-focused programs, and I'm wondering if those would be run out of the new senior center and whether some of the staff for those could complement the staff of the senior center and affect those staffing requirements. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bowlby? And then that is all for the public comment cards here. If you'd like to, please fill one out and hand it to one of our staff members and they'll help you out. Sir.
Neil Bowlby from Hazlet, Michigan. I'm wondering who's asking for a senior center of 20,000 square feet? Everything that I've heard and everything from the senior citizens are much smaller than that. Barbara O'Kelly has a wonderful proposal that has 10,000 square feet of, what's it called? Program space. 14,000 square foot building. Actually, I think it could be brought down a little bit. The 35% that's budgeted for mechanical and that kind of thing. I've seen ranges from 10 to 35%. I think with some good floor plan and creative design, that might even be brought down to 25%. So that 10,000 square feet of program, 2,500 of overhead, 12,000 square foot building. So who's asking for a 20,000 square foot building? I haven't heard anybody come to you and ask for something like that. At the last meeting, and I only reviewed it quickly, but it seems to me I heard discussion, at least two of the task force members, regarding millages. And probably there will have to be a millage for either just a standalone senior center or senior and community center. And whether to ask for 2 millages or 1 millage. And it seemed like a couple people were in favor of just going to the taxpayers once for 1 millage. Well, that would seem to suggest that either that's for only the senior center with no hope of ever building a community center, or that 1 millage would be for both senior and community center. With your plan for the combined senior community center, that's going to wind up being a much higher millage than even was requested for the Yonkers, which didn't go over very well with the board, and I don't think it will go over well with the taxpayers. So in essence, what you're doing, if you only do 1 millage with both of them, you're holding the senior center hostage to the taxpayers and saying, you know, either you give us both or you're not going to get a senior center. Unless you have a backup plan where a standalone senior center is fully funded and can be paid for out of township funds without having to go for an additional millage. I think there was talk about moving the fire station debt millage to convert that or re-ask that, since that would expire. But I want to move on quickly. So you haven't started the timer, thank you.
It's over here, sorry. You
Oh,
got about 18
because
seconds.
mine is still saying.
Got about 18 seconds left.
Oh, come on, give me just a little bit more, because it goes down to taxes. So I was looking at my taxes, my property taxes since the year 2000. In 2000, I paid $262. In 2024, I paid $713 in just township taxes. The rate of inflation has been 82% since 2000. Increase in township taxes has been 172%. So you hear people talking about the tax burden, it's real. Regarding the staffing, and I'll be real quick, just for the senior center, you're asking for one full-time utility worker, and then a .35 FTE for a building and grounds superintendent. So 0.35 FTE is 2.8 hours a day. Are you telling me that a supervisor is going to spend 2.8 hours per day supervising one employee? That doesn't really sound right. So I'm hoping you will seriously consider the plan put forth by Barbara Kelly and bring a building in that the people want.
Thank you very much. We did receive one additional card from Barb Sears.
Barb Sears, I live in Hazlet, the most northeast corner of the township. Talking with friends in the community, many of us have never been involved with the current senior center. But we are seniors and we're active and we appreciate the township we live in and what it can provide us. And I think a question that I bring from other cohort is, have other seniors in the township outside of the senior center been adequately surveyed for what they want? I know that we have a picture of what the senior center folks want, a replacement for what they've got. I appreciate that. But in my age bracket, I know a heck of a lot of people whose big activity is pickleball. I know that was in one of your letters from folks in the township. And over the winter, the only indoor facilities I know of are Court 1 and the MAC. And you have to pay fees to be able to enjoy your sport there. Or you go south where you can have it all year round. So I think I've actually just today reached out to some people I know in the pickleball community. It's not me, I'm a tennis gal, but you know, when I've been saying, once I can't play tennis, I'm gonna play pickleball. And I do think that that there's a lot of interest in the community. I've seen the pickleball people go out and raise money to put in the courts at Patriarch Park and other places. And so I'm just hoping that you'll end up hearing from some other people who might represent a more active senior community and what they could get out of the senior center.
Thank you. Anyone else this evening? Seeing none, we'll close public comment at 6:11. All right. Next up on our agenda is item 4, approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda this evening? So moved. Moved by Member Robertson,
Support.
supported by Member Maisner. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. We have one set of minutes in our packet this evening from our January 28th, 2025 meeting. Those were put together by our staff, and we appreciate that. Do we have a motion on the approval of the minutes this evening?
So moved.
Moved by Member Malley.
Second.
Supported by Member Nardo Ferris. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Next up, we have communications from the public. Included in our packet this evening, we have a number of communications with members of our public, and so we thank you for taking the time to communicate with us in that way, in addition to coming out to the meetings. Those are considered approved at this time. Next on our agenda is item 7, the meat of our discussion this evening, which is our financial discussion. And so for us here, we've got 3 members of our staff who have put together a presentation. I believe Mr. Schmidt will kick us off.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be brief and then turn it over to my compatriots, Director Wazinski and Director Opsimer, or Deputy Manager Opsimer. So I just want to paint the picture of where we're at, where we've been, where we're going, right? So we have landed on a site. We had a very good conversation at the last meeting about space programming, and our consultants are working diligently to incorporate those comments and have incorporated those comments, made the changes, sharpened their pencils, and got us to where we're at tonight in terms of being able to talk about some more specific numbers. At our next meeting, they will have conceptual plans, and we are not, to be clear, not expecting to approve the conceptual plans at that point. What we're doing is just showing how it can be laid out so that then you'll be able to make a decision between, as you were tasked by the township board to make a recommendation on senior center or senior community center. And so the middle piece of that is what we're talking about tonight. The last piece of the really meaty discussion is the financial planning. And we've gotten into some detail in our packet this evening and are prepared to talk further, especially about the questions that have been raised. Director Wazinski can speak towards the models of staffing that we've laid out and Deputy Manager Opser can speak specifically to some of the more operations-based things behind the curtain that people don't normally see, but that need to happen when you're adding any additional square footage to our current portfolio. And then we also I just want to take a big picture overview of the operational costs real quick before I turn it over to Director Wazinski to talk about the staffing models. You know, everyone's aware, we talked about what the Yonkers facility was going to cost to run. And we knew that was going to be an expensive facility just because it was a weird building, lots of quirks, second floor that we were going to have to heat that we weren't using, right? It was just under $2 million to operate that facility annually based on our estimates at the time. Based on the current estimated square footages of the senior center, only at 20,000 square feet, and 20,007 square feet, and the senior community center at 53,784, which again, takes into account all the common space, that's walls, that's everything, that's an all-in number. You know, we're under both of those numbers, and for the senior center by a significant amount, obviously, since it's a much smaller facility and there's much less to operate there. And so, those numbers are in the packet. Deputy Manager Opsimer can speak further to how those categories and how we've structured those. And the last thing I'll touch on is construction costs. At our last meeting, we did talk about rough ideas of construction costs. So the numbers in your packet are updated to those rough numbers and with the pencil sharpened versions of the current space program. So that is that $10,103,535 for the senior center and $27,169,20 for the combined facility are up to date as it currently stands. And the thing that I will point out is you have to make sure that when you're looking at those numbers, you're comparing apples to apples, because in that case, I've included both the total square footage and the programmable square footage, like the usable space, so you can see what that looks like in each facility. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking unless there are questions.
Well, I wanted to address one of the items that one of our members of the public had brought up, just as a general financial question. And I had seen this in a couple of the emails that we received from the public as well. There was some discussion about reassigning the fire station millage, renewing it for this purpose. As I understand it, having touched on this a couple of times, that is not you can't renew a millage for a different purpose.
That is not a legal expenditure, correct?
Okay, so it's not to say that, you know, that millage will be coming off the tax rolls in the coming days. And so I just want to be clear about what it is that, you know, would be talked about as we're discussing that. We're talking about basically freeing up a certain number of mills that will no longer be taxed from the fire station. And then we would have to pass a ballot initiative to replace that with something. And so the net effect of those two actions would be a little bit less, but it would be as if it's replacing it, but not actually doing that.
Exactly. It's more of a how we're selling it in the conversation than an actual one-to-one replacement.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Task Force. Thank you for having us. I am going to walk through the staffing models for a senior center only facility versus a senior and community center. Some of the things to consider and some assumptions that have been made, we can start with the senior center staffing model. Currently, it's open from 9 to 4:30, so that's approximately 37 and a half hours a week. It's currently staffed by one programmer and or manager and 0.5 FTE assistant. What that has proven in the past and most recently as well, that it's not enough people to cover a facility if somebody gets sick or somebody goes on vacation, given that the second person is only there half-time. They make do with volunteers as much as they can, but there's been times we've had to close the senior center as a result, unforeseeable circumstances. So something to consider there. Currently, prior to the new year, because they renew in January, so numbers look a little funky with membership because they have till March to renew. But pre-renewal, we were at about 383 members. They are increasing. Generally, up over this past year, they've been increasing, so I would expect it to continue to increase, but just to give you some background there. So what we're looking at is a new home for the seniors that would be open from 8 till 5 p.m., 5 days a week. To do that, we would want to continue and retain our existing senior center manager and/or programmer. She does both. Would like to upgrade the senior center assistant, which is the admin, from a 0.5 to a 1.0. So that would be a full-time assistant position, so you have a manager and an assistant. Then we would add a 1 part-time seasonal staff to support the increase in membership. So we're expecting, like one of our members said, that we may have additional people that might want to join because it's a new facility or might have different amenities. So we're expecting and we want to prepare for that. When it comes to a seasonal part-time staff, that, we budget for what we think not to exceed amount, but we generally only use them when we have work. So just know that we're very fiscally responsible when it comes to our part-time staff. And then we'll add one full-time utility worker for buildings and grounds. I would agree that maybe there's not a lot of lawn, and I'm gonna have Deputy Manager Obsmer go a little bit further into DPW, but that's not just snow removal and grass, that would be the actual building itself. So maintaining that building, all the HVAC system, all of the interior, down to lights and ceiling tiles. That's what our building, and, excuse me, utility workers for buildings and grounds manage. So the name isn't necessarily all-inclusive to what their job entails. And then adding additional utility workers, and I'll have Deputy Manager speak to this as well, but we have 2 superintendents that oversee all of the utility workers. And right now, we're at maximum capacity for that. So if we were to add additional staff for buildings and grounds, it would be to accommodate the new staff, but also to support what we are existingly doing within the township. So there, that's what we're looking at if we want just a standalone senior center that we can run at a little bit longer hours as well as staff a little bit better so that we have better coverage. We don't have to shut the doors when we don't have people to work it.
And just to remind everyone, the timing, the question, as we talk about the extended hours, the timing question was something that the task force directed us on back in November. So we've been building all those models based off that direction from the task force.
Yeah, thank you for that, yes. Because we'll get into senior and community center. I'll stop there with just senior center only. Is there any questions that I may have?
Task force members, Member Steed.
Janitorial, cleaning halls, bathrooms, kitchen, all of that, is that the utility worker?
I'll have Deputy, no, a little bit different.
A little bit different. That's not in here?
All of our custodial services are subcontracted out to a private provider.
So where does that fall in the budget for the operations?
That would fall under contractual services for buildings.
So it would not be charged to the senior center?
No, it would. So in the category that is in your packet, so motor pool and buildings and grounds
Grounds
maintenance.
maintenance.
So it's under building maintenance.
Okay,
So today, we
Okay.
have a contractual services account for all the existing buildings. We would essentially create new accounts just for the senior center or the senior and community center. And in that, we would have contractual services for HVAC contractors, custodial, waste management with Granger for trash and recycling, et cetera.
okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions? Member Nato Ferris.
I just had a quick clarification. My understanding is some of the additional staffing would be because we are no longer part of the school building, which there are some things being taken care of now that we will have to incur if we have a different standalone building.
Correct. So today, the way that these operations work between the school district and the township sends about $150,000 per year, which is for payroll for the 1.5 FTEs. The building itself, all maintenance and upkeep of the building, the grounds, that is all left to the school district.
Okay.
Today.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, Member Mason.
First of all, I super appreciate all the work that's gone into trying to determine, because it's really an unknown, but we're trying to do the best that we can to figure out what our operating costs will be and our staffing costs. So I agree with the senior center that we already have a full-time and a part-time, and we need an additional full-time
to manage all the additional programming. I know it's been limited because staff has been limited. I mean, you can only do so much with what you have. And Sherry has done a great job with that. But now they're moving to a new facility, I think it's going to draw more people in. We're going to need more people to help manage the hours and the programs. So I'm totally on board with the full-time person there. And let me see what else that, we didn't talk about recreation yet. But I am a little puzzled on the additional utility worker in the buildings and grounds. Because from my experience, the park maintenance department has maintained grounds and parks. They set up for recreation programs and special events. So if there is a utility worker hired, I think it should be in the Parks Department, that person then can go in and help set up whatever needs to happen, and is also available for any outdoor. I agree that I don't see a lot of outdoor maintenance taking place at this location if we do end up going over by the fire station. So I think that I know everybody's looking for more staff. I totally get that, and maybe this is an opportunity to get there. But we have a park superintendent already, so we do not need to have a superintendent for buildings and put it as part of this. My fear is we're trying to build this community center. And if we overload our annual expenses with, here's a way for us to get more staff, I think nothing's going to happen. And I just think we need to be a little more realistic. And I think, I know Courtney had put in here like 2 full-time recreation people. I know we haven't gotten there yet. I don't think adding 2 right away would be smart. I think we do 1, let's see how it goes. I do believe we need like a supervisor or superintendent to oversee the center and maybe manage all the recreation staff. But I think building slowly is the way to go. But I don't really see a lot of outdoor maintenance taking place. And I know that we contract out for custodial, we contract out for HVAC and those types of things. So bringing this to buildings and grounds versus parks just puzzles me a little bit. Because in the past, they haven't really done much with recreation and setting things up and, that kind of thing. So those are my comments on that part. And I think I'll wait on when you get to the recreation stuff. Courtney?
Sounds great.
I guess, Courtney and Dan, can you elaborate on the rationale for the current composition of that 1.35?
Yeah, so the general thought was because the buildings and grounds crew already serves the central fire station in those grounds and that building, that would be an appropriate place for the new utility worker to be. So otherwise, we're gonna have 2 crews drawing a line in the sand somewhere on the same property as to where their responsibilities and duties end. Also, when you're looking at the building itself, yes, Parks has the Harris Nature Center and they have the Snell Tower Rec Center, but they don't have buildings of, 10,000 plus square feet. Whereas the buildings and grounds team is more familiar with electrical, HVAC, and all the components in our buildings. So we thought for continuity, it would make more sense under buildings and grounds, but we can go back and have other conversations.
Yeah, and then there's still another utility worker for the programming on the inside. I don't know if
This is on the senior and community center?
Yeah.
For the senior and community center, yes. Today we have roughly 65,000 square feet with 2 utility workers today for buildings. And we're looking at nearly doubling that with 54,000 additional square feet. And the staff are already strained, which is why we contract so much stuff out. The one superintendent who, we have 2 superintendents today that oversee 22 people. The person with the most direct employees that they supervise is one of those 2 superintendents. They have 16 people who report to them. That's more than any other employee in the township. Nobody else has that many direct reports. So we are looking also at the team and how strained team members are existing.
How does one, so forgive me for being silly here, but how does one, you've got 2 current 2.0 FTEs as superintendents currently. How do you get someone to agree to be a 0.35 superintendent?
That would be how much of the position is funded from this millage, and then the water and sewer funds and or the general fund would fund the balance depending on how the overall duties are allocated.
Thank you. So just as a general note, I don't disagree with the notion of building slowly. But the issue here is that eventually this discussion will turn to how much money do we have to go ask for? And
That's true.
we can't build slowly if we're saying, you know, we have to put this question before the voters.
Right.
And so we have to budget for what we think it will grow into. And then if we don't use it the first couple of years, well, we've got money for other things to do. But
No, I get it. I just don't want us to overload. I look at the motor pool expense, and I was like, I think we're just putting a little bit too much into this because it's like, here's an opportunity possibly, and it's like, we need to be more realistic. And I'm all about over-delivering, under-promise, or over-promise, under-promise, over-deliver. But I just think that, I just want to make sure that we have, these are good numbers that we're working with and not, I don't know, I'll leave it at that.
And
I just want to
Lou,
make
think-
sure what we're putting in there really is what's needed for this, adding this alone. That's all.
And I think just to that point,
Yeah.
one of the things that we've, part of how we've built this ever since I really got my claws into it back in June-ish, is that this thing needs to stand on its own. I can't put another burden on the general fund, no matter how small it is, because it will quickly then take over every available amount of oxygen in the general fund. And so what you're seeing, you know, it may not be ideal that 0.35 of a utility supervisor comes out of this, or whatever we call the position, but ultimately it's needed as a result of this. And so what we're trying to do is model this in the most conservative way possible, so that if all heck breaks loose elsewhere, this is safe and it has its funding and it can continue to go forward.
I get it. Thank you very much.
yeah, and I'll point out that this has been a concern of mine since I sort of got involved with the task force as well. And one of the mandates, you know, from the board was, let's not make this a Christmas tree, you know, proposal, right? We can't cure all of the township's ills with, you know, on the backs of this particular issue. And I think that what we see here, this is my personal opinion, I think that what we see here is a fairly lean yet conservative approach to, you know, how we can maintain this facility, specifically as we look at the senior center. Now, who a utility worker works for is, to me, an operations question that goes beyond my purview as my head as a board member.
Exactly. And I was going to say, it's not our job to say who's going where and what. We're just trying to get the numbers. I totally get that. That's up to the manager and staff and all of that. So not trying to get our hands into that at all. But I just want to make sure that we are asking for the people we need, but not over asking.
Yes, agreed. Thank you. Other questions? Or further discussion?
So I'll run through the combined senior community
Please.
center. And just to say, I thank everybody for their comments, because this is what we're here for. So I appreciate everything. So senior and community center staffing model, something to consider here, and this is where the additional staff is needed, is because this would be as given direction from the task force, open 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. And so it gets tricky because, you know, making sure that we can cover those hours with the staff. So they have to overlap somehow. So it is tricky in like Director Schmidt said, we really tried to lean it down as much as we could. But I walked through the senior and community staffing model. And similarly, we would retain our current manager. We would upgrade the part-time assistant to a full-time, so a 1 FTE. We'd add the same seasonal, am I in the right one? No. All right, next one would be, so now we'd have a front desk, right? We'd have a front desk that would be the first point of contact for all of the folks that come into the community center. And so that desk has to be manned or womaned for those 6 days a week. Oh, I catch myself doing it all the time. 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. So that's where we would need a receptionist in addition to our admin assistants already. Then we can move down to, so add one full-time Parks and Land Management Coordinator. So again, this is a title. And I know Member Maisner understands, but this would be a manager's type of a personnel. So it's just a classification that's used within the unions, but it would be a supervisory type of person to oversee the programmers. So those programmers would report to a supervisor before they come to director. And when we add programmers, that would give the programmers a lot more ability to access for questions and comments, or more often concerns. Then we hit on this a little bit. We would add 2 additional recreation specialists. And again, we're open 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Now we've got full-size gyms. So right now, just through exterior outdoor recreation, we had nearly 8,000 kids that went through the Nature Center and through our sports programs. It's a lot of kiddos for 2 people. Well, Nature Center separate, but even just for the 3,000 in youth outdoor sports is 2 recreation specialists. I would expect when we have indoor basketball, indoor volleyball, camps, pickleball, all of these other things, it would be at a minimum about the same amount of participants as we would have with our existing staff. So that's where my mindset was with that. And again, our staff already works odd hours because our events are after hours and our sports are on weekends. So we have to have that overlapping component of that particular position. And then similarly, add 2 part-time seasonal staff. So it would help with membership, it would help with programming, could help with programming of the senior center and the community center, which is likely, could assist with building maintenance if needed, whatever that part-time, 2 part-time seasonal staff. And again, just to overlap on the weekends and late hours. 2 full-time utility workers. One we went through with grounds and maintenance, but adding one for what Member Maisner alluded to is all of that programming. So our current parks utility workers, they mow all the lawns, they line all the fields, they put the nets up, they take the nets down, they open the bathrooms, they close the bathrooms. All of those components. And when you're going from basketball to volleyball, the nets have to come down, the basketball hoops have to come down. So it's consistent, like you're constantly moving when it comes to that. So just kind of explain that a little bit. Then add one, and then the superintendent, again, because we're adding more utility workers, putting more of staff on the existing superintendents is going to be troubling. And one of our superintendents also is a manager of the Harris Nature Center. So keeping in mind that they manage an entire program as well. And then I think I covered it. Did I cover it? Any questions with that in addition?
Yeah, members, any questions?
Excellent.
So I noticed that between the 2 proposals, we have the same, the superintendent doesn't change from one to the other. We think that adding 1 versus adding 3 is not a significant enough change to alter the formula for an additional superintendent. Is that accurate?
I would agree, but I'll refer to Deputy Manager.
Correct. I would say that's accurate.
Okay. And then similarly to the senior center only, looking at 1 part-time seasonal staff versus 2 in this is sort of part of those areas where we grow into it, right? Like we don't, we're not going to get 15,000 people on day 1 walking into a senior community center looking for programming. Maybe we do, and that's terrific. But the idea is that eventually over time, that position gets layered in if there's a need for it.
Yes, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. Yes, Member Steed.
I have a question, just because this was brought up earlier. We're going to have a reception area and a receptionist. Is it correct that this is more of a security issue than a hosting issue? That we have a single entry place and somebody who's monitoring who's coming in and out as a safety concern? Or is this a greeter?
I would mostly safety, but I would also say point of contact, right? So are you going to the community center? Are you going to the senior center? How can you direct them? Or if they have questions, if it's a community center and we move park staff there, we have other programs we run as well. So getting them to the right people would be, it'd be a good, funnel for point of contact for the residents.
Yeah, it had been brought up earlier that maybe that was not needed. And
But I would also add, part of that's being driven by the fact that one of the things that we heard loud and clear at the last meeting was we want to try and design this so that there's a separate entrance for the senior center and the community center. And doing that essentially requires that you add this, functionally, it will require that we add this position because you'll have two entrances. And the idea that someone would be able to walk into one and just sort of get into the building kind of thing, then you have a bit of a safety issue.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Member Robertson.
More of a historical kind of question. Director Schmidt, you might know this. How does the FTE employee side compare to the Yonkers site? Is this pretty much on par with it? Is it more than we were expecting then, or how does that come down?
I'll defer to the deputy manager here. He's been in the numbers way more than me.
Yeah, we had proposed a fourth utility worker for buildings and grounds in the Yonkers proposal. This one only has 3, so that's a 25% reduction. And then, of course, the senior-only center is a 75% reduction from the Yonkers proposal. A lot of the savings, too, from the Yonkers proposal, $60,000 a year was saved just by not locating in the mall for the, what do we call those again?
The common area fees.
Yeah, the common area, kind of HOA-esque fees for the mall itself, that was $60,000 a year. And then we were also, when we had the Yonkers proposal, we were looking at a 20-year millage that was going to fund operations and also the initial construction. And so we have a flat roof. We were going to be replacing part, but not all of it. And so a lot of savings also came from here with new construction. We're planning on doing a metal pitched roof versus having a flat roof with a 20-year millage. We were worried, okay, if the roof is failing in year 18 and we still have 2 years to go out to renew a millage, we're going to be left trying to find approximately probably $2 million in the general fund.
Sure.
Which is not something that we've ever done. So that was also a consideration. And so we had actually put in the budget for Yonkers savings each year incrementally so that we would have enough to replace the roof at the end of the first millage, years 17 through 20 roughly. So those are some of the big savings. A lot of things just scale with square footage as well. The cost to heat and cool the facility is roughly $2 a square foot. So that just scales up and down with square footage.
Sure.
Same with contractual services. A lot of that will scale up and down. Yonkers also had 2 elevator shafts. So, and code recently changed, so we were gonna have to upgrade those elevators to meet the new code that's about to come into effect. I believe that was $100,000 just to get them compliant with the code. Then there's the annual inspections and repair and maintenance too. And that was gonna double the number of elevator shafts we have amongst township facilities too. So there's a lot that's different with a new build where we can design how it's built versus an existing structure that we're retrofitting and we have to live with certain things within that structure.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Member Melly.
Yeah, this may have been said and I just missed it, but are these staffing models built upon low, medium, or high estimates of activity? So are we saying for 2 full-time recreation specialists that would be the maximum we need if this was radically successful and this whole endeavor were to be a success, that should do it? Or is that kind of like a minimum viable, like to service the population here with what we think will come in, could those numbers grow? Could they shrink? Like, I'm just trying to think through the sizing conversation and the scaling of when you launch it and kind of what that programming looks like to start. And I do appreciate, just like in terms of putting together a model like this in an abstract, like,
Right.
that we're really just having a conversation about like, what might it look like? But I was just kind of curious when you all were talking about these models, where you were basing the numbers on.
Yeah, and it's a very good question, because it is
Yeah.
a moving target, right? So the way we tried to be very conservative, but we also, as both directors have mentioned, we want, if we're gonna build this, we want to make sure that we can staff it. I like the tiered approach, especially for seasonal. That's very easy to do. But the way I determined the rec specialist, for example, is looking at the existing numbers, what we do in youth sports outside. I also looked at some numbers on other community centers and what type of traffic are they getting as well. So wanted to make sure that we covered it, but I'm feeling confident that we have enough.
Okay.
And if we don't, then that's a wonderful thing too. We'll address that when we get to it, but
So
like you said.
you said 8,000, right? Is that the number that you used for the outdoor programs? Got about 8,000.
Yeah, about 8,000. Well, and I look at the number of sports. There's a lot of activities we cannot offer because we don't have indoor sports.
Right.
As well as, and we work with Hazlitt in basketball.
Right.
If we have a basketball court, then we would be able to give, we wouldn't need the other courts as much, which could still be used, right? So we have more kids that want to play than we can accommodate
Yeah.
at this point.
I'd be happy to send kids to use your course as opposed to this. But I'm just trying to think through, we were just recently having a conversation about the amount of traffic and the numbers and just the programming of the recreation and just the support of the community. So I definitely have an appreciation for just the amount of time and energy that goes into those relationships and the connecting of those dots. But it's hard for me to conceptualize whether or not 8,000 for a space of this square footage. Is it a lot of people coming in and out, or is it not so much? But it really is. It's just kind of, it's a moving target that you don't really know. You're making some guesses right now, I suppose. And but yeah, I can appreciate the complexity of putting it together.
Yeah, and not only sports, I mean, if we had a community center, we could provide enrichment programs that we don't have the ability. So we could do drop-in programs or art programs or teen programs. We could do a whole lot more that I know our existing rec specialists would love to do. We just don't have the capacity to be able to do that at this time.
If someone is a member of the public and wanting to use this space for something that the township is not actively programming for themselves, someone wants to have a meeting, who do they interface? Is it someone that's, in this list? Is it one of the receptionists? Is it one of the rec specialists? Who is it that they would talk to about facilities management in that capacity?
So for example, if somebody wanted to rent a meeting space.
Sure.
That would generally go through an admin, right? So it'd go through reception would send it, is it senior center or is it community center? Send it to those admins and then go from there. That's how I would expect that to work. If it's recreation, for example, there's mentioned a pickleball. Pickleball, we support as a department, but we do not provide that type of program. So there's people that have taken over the program and made it very manageable, and they manage the whole thing out there themselves. We just support the pickleball courts, the parking, all the grass, shade structures, all of the nets and everything else you need to maintain a pickleball court. So there's a little bit of that. So if somebody came and said, we now want a pickleball league, then we could do that. And that would, they would go to reception would send them over to parks, and then we'd have them talk to a specialist.
Sure. So as a sort of we'll call it a follow-up, I guess. Some of the activities that you're talking about, leagues, kids sports, room rentals, all of that sort of thing, more often than not, that is a revenue generating activity of some kind. How do you build that into your model when we're looking at the operational cost of a facility like this?
Excellent question, and I was actually working on that today. So we're looking into what our current, profit loss is right now, or revenue for our current sports, and only rentals we have are pavilions. So we're looking at that, but then we're also looking into other community centers and how how they can see, or what they're doing for revenue, right? Where's all of their revenue coming in, and what do they have to do to make up that cost? What is it gonna cost for a program? And so I'm looking through all of our fees. Are we, and again, we don't necessarily wanna make money, but we need to be able to support the activities that are happening. So that's where we are working on that,
Yeah.
Supervisor.
And I ask because, at some point, as has been mentioned, I'm gonna sneeze in the middle of this, excuse me. Or not. I've said it all out, so at some point, we're gonna have to go ask the voters to help support this in some way, right, no matter what we do. And so what we see here in front of us is essentially the cost side of the equation. And of course, that would be offset by any revenue that the facility itself brings in, right, that the programs that are operating out of it bring in. And so I'm interested to see, even if it's a very conservative estimate, can we get a sense of what that is? Because if we're going to the voters and asking for the full costs, expecting no revenue, well, now we're overpaying for what the center, senior only or senior end community, actually requires of us. And so I would be interested in sort of at least gaming out a little bit what the revenue numbers could look like, so that we put before the voters, the most efficient and most, reasonable ask that we can.
Yes, thank you. And our manager Dempsey had already put me on that task, so I'll work with our team here to do that and try to get something to the task force prior to the next meeting.
Thank you. Member Steve.
Yeah, two things. I think, too, we want to look and see what they're getting in the way of sponsorships. Just like our fields at our football fields and those things.
Yeah.
We certainly can go after local sponsors for different programs as well, I think, that might reduce some of that. And if we can make it an annual kind of thing, that might give us some consistent revenue. Just a question. How many people, just to guess right now, are using those outdoor pickleball courts that might conceivably be shifting to indoor pickleball, given that opportunity?
It's so difficult to say, and I've reached out to both
Any guesses?
teams.
Are we talking like 200, 2,000, somewhere in between?
It's hard to say. I would say somewhere in between. And it depends, but Towner is we have 6 pickleball courts out there, and they are packed. Monday,
8.
6, Lou, I think.
Yes,
Is it
6 at town.
I've played at Towner.
I'm trying to visualize it in my head. So those are from 9 a.m. till dark. Those are full. And then Hillbrook, the same thing, but there's just fewer pickleball courts. But gosh, it would be hard, Michelle, but I
just wondered.
I can
There's 4
reach back out.
Okay.
It says we have 4 at
at
Hillbrook,
Hillbrook.
Okay.
and also, they play all winter long. We leave the nets up.
Yep.
They snow blow it, they shovel it. They've got squeegees, year round, they're playing. The first year we took nets down, oh, did we ever hear about it? Got the nets back up, because it's not just a
Yeah.
spring, summer, fall sport.
Yeah.
If there's any mild weather, they're out there, so
And
it's.
our neighbors in East Lansing, the Patriarch, I've had occasion to be out there on
Yeah.
a Saturday morning at, 7 in the morning for my little one's soccer at one point a couple of years ago, and they are packed, packed. I mean, 20 to 40 people, on there at all times. The need is there, the want is there.
Yeah, well, and I know people sneak over to MSU sometimes too, and put the courts over there until somebody moves them out. So,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, just wondered.
Yeah, I think no fair weather fans when it comes to pickleball players,
Oh, yeah.
and there's more than enough to fill a community center.
All right.
What other questions do we have? I think this is really well thought out. I think you could quibble here and there, I think, but it's overall, I don't think it's unreasonable what you've put forward here.
Clarification question. Let's just kind of circle back in general for just a moment. Our task here is to come up with senior community center recommendation and approximate costs. We're not the body that's going to decide what we're gonna do on this, or how much we're gonna fund it for, or if this is going to be a yay or nay, correct?
Yes.
We're just making a recommendation. This is gonna go to the township board, and they're gonna have those hard discussions. We're gonna do the best we can to put together good, solid proposals for them. But ultimately, we're not the body making that decision, right? Or is that-
Ultimately, yes.
Ultimately,
We
yeah,
make
we're
two,
gonna
we make two
recommendations.
recommendations. And the township board will consider those
Yeah.
and
I think that's
Absolutely not.
important for people who are looking at the cost, looking at all of those other things. And I think it might be a good idea to backtrack. We had a question, who's asking for a 20,000 square foot senior center? And I think that would be a good question to address from a needs perspective. And maybe we could talk about that for just a minute, because
yeah.
I don't think we said this is the square footage we want. I think we said this is what we are being told needs to be in this building, and this is the resulting square footage.
Right.
So maybe if we could just talk about that for a minute, it might be a good idea.
Absolutely.
So I'll jump in and then I'll let Tim
Yeah.
take over in a second.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, when we say a 20,000 square foot facility, we're talking about a 14,000 square foot facility that you can actually use.
Right.
Followed by, closets and walls and,
Right.
heating and electrical. So there's that component to it, right? And right now, all of the numbers that we ever see about the square footage in the current senior center, until very recently, has been the programmable space, not the total space.
Yeah.
And so I think Director Wazinski did some additional new measurements lately. And of course, there's history about, additional space that had been there previously that had been sort of reappropriated, but be that as it may. So 14,000 square foot is what we're actually talking about from a programmable standpoint here. And you're absolutely right to point out, in terms of the process that we got to here with, which was, and I see that our member of the public who had asked about that has left us unfortunately, but what we'll tell him the next time he comes is that, we did our design meetings, our charrettes, both here at the senior center, our current senior center. We did a couple of them over the summer as well about the previous proposal that was brought before us. And each and every time, what came up was, a number of wants and hopes for what this would be included in the senior center. And we said at the beginning, at the outset, right, like, this is our big dream and we'll have to winnow it down over time. And what was presented in January was the big dream proposal. And I think, as we sat here in January and talked about what does the future hold for this, we said, okay, well, first of all, we'd like to ask for 10 to 15% reduction, because overall, we understand there's some bloat here. We can find a way to cut it down. And now I'm going to shift from historical into Scott's opinion of reading that conversation was, as we talked about, well, can we remove this room out? Can we remove that function out? What I saw from a number of the members of the senior community who were present in the room was a lot of shaking heads and, oh, you can't take the workout room, like, we desperately want that. And so the answer to the question is, the folks who participated in the design meetings want the 20,000 square foot facility, 14,000 programmable, because that's what they said they wanted in the building. And over time, as we talked about the possibility of removing some of these pieces, there was a very clear and visible, reaction that no, please don't take those away. Now, maybe you can nip and tuck, and that's sort of what the consultants are up to right now, in sharpening the pencils. But, it's very difficult once you put a plan in front of people and say, this is what you're gonna get, except we're gonna take things away. It's very difficult to take those things away. And so I think that's what we sort of ran into at our January, no,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is the February meeting.
Yes.
At our January meeting, was that issue right there. Tim,
And I would just, to add on to that thought, at one point in the January meeting, I actually suggested removing one specific room because it would have gotten to the number everyone was talking about. And there was a visceral no, we don't want to do that. We want to try and find another way to get there, because I think the key, and we've gone about this process in a sort of a unique way in that we didn't start with a budget, right? A lot of times with a project like this, you're gonna start with a budget and what can we design towards? What can we get into it? We've really done the pie in the sky of asking the questions and trying to reach out to the groups. Successfully or not, we have done a lot of reach out over the course of the last 6 months to get that feedback. And that feedback is what's driven the layout and program that you saw in January. Staff is now sort of driving the bus on the operations and the staffing because we kind of understand, and specifically my compadres behind me, what we're going to need to do to make this work. And that, we may be getting into a little bit more of what we want to make this function as appropriate as possible, but we've also tightened this down as effectively as we can because we also recognize the parameters behind this. If we're having this public conversation about a millage potentially, then we need to be tight in our numbers as well. But yeah, make no mistake, as Supervisor Hendricks pointed out, there's nothing added in here that's just hey, we think this is a great idea. This has all come out of a conversation that it has been brought up by seniors. It has been brought up by the public at some point in the last 6 months. I would say everything in there. I can't think of one thing in there that hasn't.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add is, to your question about, the process that we're undergoing here. My understanding is the pictures that we get from our consultants, right? These are conceptual drawings, right? Everything is subject to change until you start putting a shovel in the ground, and even then, some of the interior stuff may move around. And so basically, what we're doing is we're recommending a budget for these two things based on what we've heard from the design process and these meetings. And the idea is essentially, okay, we're sending those two budgets to the township board saying, this is what we think we need from operations and building for senior only. This is what we think we need from operations and building senior and community center. And the board will eventually discuss, make a decision about whether to do one path or the other path. Or maybe they'll make a decision to do one path, but with changes, or the other path and with changes. And so all we can do is take in all the information that our staff has put together, do so in a public way that invites input, and make as good a recommendation as we can to the board so that they know that, this has been vetted by this group and our staff and the public along the way, and they can make the best decision possible.
The needs assessment part of this, there were all of those community listening sessions that were held over the course of, I don't know what the time frame was.
We've done listening sessions both in 23 and 24.
Okay, so we've had a couple of years of listening sessions, which also provided kind of a basis for some of those needs. And then these additional meetings went through and kind of said, do you want this now? Do you want this now? Oh, you want this instead now. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'll add to that and say that
Okay.
we also had our triennial survey in 2024 and in 2021, both of which addressed some matter of these questions, so that we get a sense of if people would want something and what they would want.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification on that.
I saw Member Robertson, and then we'll come to Member Nara Ferris.
Thank you. Question relates to the annual operating budget for senior center versus the senior community center as we look at the square footage size. When it comes to like the sharpening of pencils for progressive, it looks like the senior center only option did reduce in size by about 15%. When you compare to the dual senior community center, it looks like it went down by 5%. Is there a reason why we didn't try to get another 10% out of that to tighten that a little bit more fiscally?
Mr. Robertson, are you referring to the square footage or to
Correct.
the total budget?
Sorry, the square footage. So it looks like the senior center went from like maybe 24,000 down to 20. Senior community center went from like 56,000 to 53,000. Just kind of curious why it didn't go down to like maybe sub 40s.
Yeah, so I can, I need to look into that a little bit. I think some of the issue is that, if I'm remembering correctly, some of the things you're taking out of the senior center model get added back in potentially to the community center model. So the senior center model would end up having a larger reduction. But let me circle back on that question.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I guess just as a theme, I would just echo, if we need to be more aggressive with the dual option, I would say that while we have time, try to do that.
Thank you. Member Navarro Ferris.
I just had a comment, speaking mostly to the strictly senior center, that if we went to bare bones that, I think we wouldn't allow ourselves the opportunity to accommodate, to Ms. Sears' point, those seniors that are not currently participating in the current senior center for whatever reason for programming. So if we just do exactly what we've got, I don't believe there'll be an opportunity to expand that or do it. So if we're going to re-envision this, I think those additional areas are needed.
Thank you. Other comments? Yeah, Member Mazur.
Not to reiterate some things that have already been said. When I'm on that side and listening, sometimes that happens. But, I think that with all the comments that came in from the Senior Center Advisory Board and the senior center members, the glaring message was, we want to make sure that we have the same amount of square footage as we have now. That was their concern, that they were going to have less. And I think as one of our recommendations moving forward to the board, that we could say that whatever, we have gotten into the weeds a little bit with the rooms and the dimensions, and I think, going back to what our role is that are we going to have a center? Are we going to have it as a community center, senior center combined, senior center standalone? Where is it going to be? But how much to operate, how much to build for construction. So I think we have gotten in a little bit too far with the rooms. But I think if there can be reassurance to the current members and its advisory board that they are going to have at least as much as they have now for just themselves. Because back when this all started, when the Okemos schools we were going to lose the home for the senior center, we put in a money request for a senior community center. We know we needed a place, make it for the whole community. How do we make that happen? And the biggest concern that I've heard from the current seniors who participate is they want to make sure with whatever happens, they want to have at least the same amount of space. So I think if we can assure them that that is the case, I think then we move forward with what else is going to be there. And come up with whatever approximate square footage and approximate budget. And I think that's kind of where we're at moving into the next meeting. But I think those assurances, I think that's really what what's the interest is for the current people. And I think we've always had more of an interest in like Barb Sears, and there's other people out there who may want to participate, who are more active, and how can we accommodate that population as well. And for asking for a millage, we want to make sure there's a way to accommodate everyone. So my recommendation, or where I'm headed, is we build one building. We have a separate area under that roof for the seniors. That's their space. That's at least 7,500 square feet. And then the other amenities that we're going to have, as much as we can for a budget that the township can afford.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, just to add to that, I think that you're absolutely right in terms of the initial reaction from our senior advisory board members. Certainly was, we need to have our dedicated space that's, what it is that we have today. And I agree that, I think that from my perspective, if we're going to build a building and we're going to, invest in a new facility for the seniors, that we do so in a way that will invite additional participation from the members of our community who who would otherwise use it but aren't currently using it, and building out the programming and all of that. I think that what we've seen sort of a turn to as we get to a slightly larger facility is I haven't heard a whole lot of concern recently about, having enough space in the senior center, right? We're clearly providing enough space in the current proposals here. I think the concern has turned to, let's make sure we do so in a cost-efficient way, right? Let's not over-ask in a way that's going to, be too burdensome on our taxpayers. That's what I think we saw in a couple of our communications recently, were folks who were concerned about the burden of the cost of that. And I think that's, always the delicate balance that we deal with, when we look at a project like this, at an infrastructure project, is how do we provide all the things that are being asked for and that are needed and that will, be of long-term value, while also being good financial stewards of the township's, tax dollars for our residents. And so I think what we've got here is a pretty decent thing. I think, taking a look at the senior community center and seeing if we've trimmed down to, what is actually been asked for would be a good thing. Looking at that square footage and seeing if we need all of that actually, if we've gotten our cost savings from that. Like I said during the discussion of the staffing model, I don't see a whole lot of bloat being added here. And so I'm relatively pleased with that. And I think that this will end up costing us less than what we're seeing on the page here, because there will be some money generated from this facility, and that will bring down overall the operating costs as well. So I think that, I want to be mindful of the dual concerns that we've been hearing from our seniors, and also cognizant of the fact, that regardless of which path the township board chooses to move forward on, all of the voters in Meridian Township will be bearing the burden of whatever the decision is that gets made. And so if it's senior only, we have to recognize that there are folks in their 20s and 30s who will be paying on this millage, to support that. And I think that's something that the township is willing to support. I also think that, we have to be cognizant of the fact that, we might bring a much bigger swath of people interested in this by offering something that's available to all. Which is why, part of the reason why we want to look at both of our options. So that's where I'm coming from on that. Yes. Member Maker.
Okay. And also, I'm not a fan of the phasing. I think if we're going to do the combined, we do the combined. If the agreement by the township board is to do a senior center, then we do the senior center. But I just don't see all the effort going into to a phased project where it's gonna be, let's do the seniors first, and then now we've got to rally to come up with money and build later. I just don't see that as realistic.
Member Ferris.
Coming from a construction project management background, I would echo that, by the way. No, my point was, Mr. Bobley, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correct, but I think what you just addressed is that, speaking of the needs to the wants, people may define the needs a little bit differently, but I think this is what we have been presented with today are really needs based on what's been heard over the past couple of years. Not necessarily wants that are up in the sky. They're needs by somebody. It may not be for me, or it may not be for a specific, other person, but I do think that this is narrowing down so that it is addressing the needs that we've talked about and moving forward with that.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right.
So the only thing I would ask is if there is, of the 6-7 members up there, if there is any question or piece of information that you think you might need, please let us know. We do have a short turnaround for the next meeting, as we are meeting early in the month of March to work around spring break. So if there's anything that you could possibly think of, no matter how big or small, let us know and we will address it, because we want to provide you with as comprehensive of a packet of information for the March meeting as we can.
Yeah. So what I heard this evening that we were hoping to have followed up on was looking at the square footage of the senior and community center and making sure that we are adequately economizing as we had asked for. Looking at the revenue, possible revenue generation coming from this and how that might bring down the overall operating costs that we would need to ask the voters for. Were there other things that we wanted to make sure we addressed?
Those were the two I had.
Those were the two that I can recall being the big asks. So yeah, I think that's essentially where we find ourselves.
Everybody knows how to get a hold of me. If something pops up in the middle of the night, just shoot me a quick email. I'm happy to
3 a.m.
figure it out.
Okay, so before we conclude the actual business portion, the last board update, which will be to the township board as a result of our work, both at this meeting and our March meeting, is I believe on March 18th. That's the board's second meeting in March. Do we have any volunteers who would like to go and essentially present what is the completed works of the task force at that time? That's a Tuesday, that's the third Tuesday of March.
And our next meeting is the 11th.
The 11th, yes.
Correct.
I'm out of town, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm out of town.
As
I am out of town.
Are we all out of town?
Everybody's out of town.
Nice March.
Not from the 12th to the.
Yeah, right. Well, then, it'll be some combination of myself and the staff.
Can we zoom in?
You are I think you're welcome to watch on YouTube or home TV anytime from anywhere, so.
Zoom it in.
All right, well, I will plan on giving the update, which, I guess we're finished anyway at that point, so we'll give a complete and final update at that time.
I nominate John Hood.
Great
Excellent
idea.
choice.
We need to-
He said he's
I second
free.
that.
Yeah, right. We need to keep them away from sick people. That's that's the first and foremost thing.
Sure, somebody who works in the school
I
district.
know.
That doesn't seem like it's possible.
Terrific. So that brings us to agenda item 8, which is public remarks. Anyone from the public wishing to make remarks this evening? Ms. O'Kelly. Oh, take your time.
I have 4 things that came up tonight that I hope quickly to get. Ms. Wazinski, I'm a little concerned about a half-time seasonal employee at the senior center. It seems that then we still only have 2 people there all the time. So if one is on vacation, the other one gets sick, there's still not necessarily anyone to cover. So I would hope that we'd have that half-time as a full year-round employee rather than seasonal. I hope that in thinking about how much income facility will generate, that there is a distinction, which I think Beth Bechtel in her email that I think you folks all have, she distinguished between membership fees and the recreation fees. So most most community centers have pretty low membership fees. And our senior center right now is just $25. Whereas the recreation fees for courts and things are well over $100 at the other center. So I think that's an important distinction. In the plan that, the space requirement list that I sent around to everybody, we've got about 10,000, I think 10,800, or over 10,000 square feet of programmable space, which we'd like. And there is room for expansion, not to fitness, or not to group, like basketball things. But we do have then 3 multi-purpose rooms, rather than the 2 we had pre-COVID in the senior center, along with separate rooms for table tennis and billiards, so that frees up more space. So we do hope to have additional activities when we have both more space and more staff. But particularly I want to thank Tim for emphasizing 2 separate entrances. And it's not just the entrances to the building that we're concerned about. It is also having separate parking near the senior entrance so that even those of us like me who don't have handicap permits, I guess I'm eligible, but I just had a knee replacement 3 weeks ago and another one 7 weeks ago. And so I'm hobbling and I really don't want to walk a big distance from the general parking to get into the entrance to the community center. So if we have one at one end and one at the other end, and we can have parking that's pretty much for seniors, can be, overflow, but then one at the other entrance for the general community, that would be very helpful. So when, Tim, if you could keep that for the consultants, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else in the public wishing to speak this evening? Seeing none, we'll close public comment at 7:18. Last up on our agenda is item 9, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Member Robertson,
Support?
supported by Member Nagassetti. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And we stand adjourned at 7:19 PM.